met Mayor Matt Bemrick through one of my partners, and ultimately this came to fruition. So I think it's a great opportunity not only for me but also Fort Dodge. So I appreciate Fort Dodge having me help you through this process. So I assume everybody knows the Warden, right? Everybody knows where it's at, everybody knows all the things about it. And so my recollection and all the conversations I've had with everybody in this community is this project's been going on for years. When I was a kid, I was in the Warden when there was retail spaces on the first floor. I can remember that building back in the day. And it looked better than it does now, for sure. But ultimately, you've got this project where there's a wonderful opportunity in Fort Dodge to turn it into a redevelopment. So when I say redevelopment, you've got the cross connector, you have this massive building that you would hate to see go. I mean, early 1900s, 17 was essentially the Wakanza Annex, 1924-25 was the Warden building. You've got about 260,000 square feet of space amongst those two buildings. And the city has engaged a developer to redevelop the 6 floors of the Warden, which is about 120,000 square feet of space, or about 1,000 square foot a unit. You've got about 120 residential units at market rate that are essentially planned through that developer for the Warden. They've left it to the city to be responsible for the first 2 levels of that Warden and redevelopment, and then the adjacent block where the Wakanza Annex is, and then also the parking lot south of Carver, and the potential vacating of part of 10th Street. So what we've been doing is we've been working with all the, Iowa Central, we've been working with Friendship Haven, Unity Point. We just met with Julie today. I've met with Dan Kinney a couple of times, met with Mike DeWorth and Troy at Martin's at the hospital to try to understand, as well as the SMID group. You guys are part of this group, but just to say, let's build momentum for this project, not from a standpoint of we're not here to fundraise, but as much as to say, what are the synergies that we can gain from this community? Something that we're talking about with this Wakanza coming down and then a potential rec center on that site has a reach of 50,000 plus people, population. That's the size of the community that would serve. So if Fort Dodge is a 26,000 member population range, you're definitely reaching out in all of Webster County with this type of project. So it's got a unique opportunity for your downtown, a unique opportunity for you as a community. We've made the sheet I gave you in front here. The only thing I changed, this was the last council update we gave within the month. The only thing I changed is I said January through March, but it's actually now January through April. And so what we've done is we have set up, does everybody have at least a version to share? I didn't print off enough. I had no idea how many people were here, and I didn't know if we had a bunch of AV or anything like that. So if you got any questions, please just yell at me. When I say NP committee, what I mean is a nonprofit committee. And so what we're trying to do is we want to make sure we have alignment from the rec, which is the community rec, and then we have the city rec, and then we have the cultural center, which is Susan Ehlers-Lehman as part of the Fine Arts, Fort Dodge Fine Arts Association. We also have these other groups like Iowa Central, Friendship Haven, and also your Unity Point, to say how can you come together as a group to say you're probably the primary users of this new facility. And so the NP committee is a nonprofit committee that would ultimately do the operations for the new rec center. So we've assembled that, we've established weekly meetings with that group and KDG, so we're making good progress where we have everybody in the room now and we can start to make some good decisions. And really, we're not making decisions as much as we're understanding what do we need to do next. KDG proposal, they proposed a financial stack, they proposed how they would renovate the 6 floors of the Warden as well as do the historic preservation piece of that. We have been here as an extension of the city to review their stacks and validate whether or not they're right or going down the right path. So far, so good. There's a lot to be done, no question about that. Introductory meetings, kind of talked about that already. We've talked to Unity Point, Iowa Central, the SMID group, and also, I forgot, Webster County Supervisors. We've met with the group. We've presented what's going on here. This might actually be a city-county partnership in this endeavor. So it's not just, it's another key constituent that we have in this whole big deal. Supplemental inspections we've done to better identify asbestos and lead and mold and all of the things that are existing in the Warden and the Wakanza. Actually, the city had procured the first round of inspecting, because the first thing you have to do before you do anything, even demo. If you're going to demo the entire site, the first thing you have to do is you have to take out all of the environmental contaminants, and they've got to be properly taken care of. So you can't just take and tear it down and throw it in the landfill. And so the first inspection was a little bit general of sorts. So we leveraged our contacts within the Iowa Department of Natural Resources to help pay for a supplemental instruction. They paid for all of it, actually, inspection, to come in and very specifically identify what has asbestos in it, what has lead in it. And now we have a very good plan. If you've been in the Warden lately, there's stacks of asbestos-containing tile, just extras, many extras. So the stuff's everywhere. And I'm hearing that it could be one of the worst contaminations in the state. And so, not that it's not something that we can't overcome, but it's something to consider and make sure we address that appropriately before we go on to subsequent phases of the project. The cultural rec planning, validation and concept development, we brought in, thank you for your initial plans, because those became the plans that have essentially evolved into what we saw this week, with a large group of all of these constituents were in the room. We even had the Visitors Bureau in the room, actually, that would say, hey, what do you want versus what can we get? And there were two options that were in the realm of a $32 million plan that has $25 million for a rec center, which has a lot of cool things in it. $7 million on top of that would be for a cultural center, a big black box, and how that works with the Warden, and all the way up into the $40 million range for the ultimate plan of what everybody said they would want. So you take that 10 years of kind of planning and ideas and thoughts and say, okay, here's how does it fit, which is the city's obligation with their agreement with, preliminary agreement with KDG developers, to say, hey, does the rec fit adjacent to the Warden, and can the city find a use for those first two floors? And this is that validation, very preliminary. They call it the rough and dirty sketch, or quick and dirty sketch, to say, does it work? And so I'd say based on Tuesday's meeting, it does work. And now we think, if we have a target now, we know exactly what each component for community rec, city rec, cultural center, kind of go down the list, we know what each of those program pieces would cost, so that can help us target how we either modify that plan or how we evolve it, or even getting into fundraising eventually, which is going to happen in this next year. So that happened this week, and I'm sure it'll be on a city website soon once we get it refined. Their final deliverable is due at the end of April. So I would say first part of May we might have some really cool stuff to show and share. The refining project cost, sources, and gaps. So part of our job, my business partner runs a construction management firm. They do about $120 million worth of volume a year in the Des Moines area. And so I've leveraged them to say, hey, what should these things cost? And so right now, KDG has a kind of a number of around $32 million for what they need to do, clean up in the Warden and do their apartments. And this whole thing that we saw yesterday, or I'm sorry, Tuesday, was about $32 million as well for the rec. So you're talking about a $65 to $70 million project overall, which, as we all know, won't just happen overnight. Perfect world scenario, if we were able to do everything we needed to do between April and April, there could be a shovel in the ground doing what we need to do to make this happen, and the project could be done as soon as November of 2020. But that's perfect world scenario. I mean, there's a lot of things that have to happen to make that happen. So, but just kind of give you an idea, there could be something there as soon as that. The other thing we've run into is that with this, you're going to create downtown a potential load of maybe 200 to 300 vehicles by not only the residences, but then also the rec center. And the problem is people don't want to walk far to get to the amenity. And so part of the consideration as well is to look at, is there a way to structure parking to promote further redevelopment of the parking areas downtown, create some dense parking so that it serves not only this facility, but it opens up more opportunities for additional development. And that additional development is a good thing for the community, because what it does is it creates an immense amount of tax base. And that's what you want to promote. So it's kind of like, this is that first thing in that area, to ultimately create, hopefully, hundreds of millions of dollars of tax base over time in the rest of the area that's downtown, vacant spots, etc. So we're working on understanding, are those costs real? Are those good projections? Are those good targets? Are those, attainable? Could it be done for that? That's what we're helping the city do as well. And then we're working on the overall master schedule. I talked briefly about what the schedule is, but we're trying to break that down in enough detail to say, what would it take if KDG does everything they need to do on their timeline? What would it take for the city, county, and all of those other constituents to do their part on their timeline? So that is a very quick version of what we've been doing with the city for the last three and a half months. And so I want to leave plenty of time, because I heard this group never has questions, but just in case you did, I wanted to be here to at least answer those questions for you.
Yeah, when we were working with the original concepts and trying to see if it actually could be done, we were trying to get some of the rec center functions into the Warden in some way, like the workout area and that kind of thing. Is that kind of pretty much abandoned now, and basically it's all rec center on the new edition kind of thing?
The new concept, which is so fresh, I don't even have electronic or any copies with me, but Vicki could probably share that with you if you want. It has most of the program elements. So when you talk about your pools and your gyms,
right,
and your cultural center black box, I mean, all these spaces, just massive.
Right.
And so what they've done is to try to figure out how those elements fit around those pieces, and then use some of your administrative pieces or your breakouts in the main building. There's things where the rec has said, hey, we have the Snap franchise, and so Snap Fitness could go
right
in the Warden.
Yep.
The developers want a restaurant, so that could go in the Warden. The black box can use some of their ancillary program can go in the Warden, and then use the east entrance as kind of a grand art gallery, all kinds of things that go into the cultural center component, which is the black box theater. So we've tried to mix it up, and actually it creates some very interesting space. The main entrance from the Warden on the south becomes then the highlight point of where you can look into the rec and see the pool. Just those kinds of things, and a lot of glass around the rec, which there's about a 20-foot difference in elevation from the northwest corner to the southeast corner if you take that whole thing. And so you're actually on an upper level of the rec center. You're about on the same level as the track when you're walking on street level. So it's just, there's so many different things that go on when you look at this thing in section, but it all fits very nicely. So there's a couple of options on the table. There'd be like a 3-story or a 4-story, and the 4-story, of course, is in the 40 million range. But it all does fit within the Carver parking lot, 10th Street, and then where the Wakanza was.
That Carver parking lot, though, I think is for the Carver building. It's owned by them. So, and I don't know that they're gonna wanna give up their parking, so your big downside is not having parking for that rec center. And I'm not sure I like the idea of putting it there because of that. Cause at one time, I know the proposal was to put it over where the old Fairway store was.
Right.
And I personally think that'd be a better location.
Well, and that's part of the option is that, so did everybody hear that okay, is the Carver parking lot? That's one of the reasons, so we needed to say, what could work? So this isn't done. I mean, we're not gonna go put the shovel in the ground, but what could work? That's the only way that this does work. And where this came from is to say the developers are looking for what enhances the visibility and the accessibility and the amenities of the residential component. Something like this would. So we've learned that the Wakanza site isn't enough, and the 10th Street just isn't enough. So it's one of those things where conceptually it would need that Carver parking lot, but potentially if you had structured parking and say even east of that or south or north somewhere that connected all of this together, that's how you would make up for that parking loss. And we have a struggle because it couldn't go to the south because we have the historic funeral home, we have the cross street connector and all of these things, and you have the restored Wakanza then to the north.
Which is that old garage to the south of the Warden too that could be used.
Absolutely, exactly. And so those are kind of the things we're just trying to kind of balance all the constraints to say what would work. But good question.
And that was always used for that. The Warden owned that for a long time, that parking garage, and they'd rent spaces inside on the roof, along the side.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's on our map to say what if. So, yeah.
all the parking you're talking about is just ground level parking, not a ramp or anything?
Current today, it's all ground level everywhere, but what would likely need to happen, and we don't know how we pay for this, we don't know how it would look, or we don't know where it would go, but you'd have to look at some sort of structured higher density parking